The videotape you're about to see will help you learn about the part of our national government called the executive branch, headed by the President of the United States. It will teach you how the executive branch works, how it affects you, and how you can affect it. The videotape will cover 5 subjects. 1, the importance to you personally of the executive branch. 2, its structure and operation, the departments, the independent agencies, the White House. 3, how the executive branch is affected by the legislative branch, the Congress. 4, executive branch policymaking, a hypothetical example, compulsory national service. And 5, the importance of the people's involvement, lobbying and voting. This videotape also intends to prove to you that learning about the President's executive branch can be enjoyable and interesting. Maybe not that interesting, but interesting. By the end of this videotape, you will know more about your country's executive branch of government than do 70% of all Americans, regardless of their age. You will next hear from an extraordinary American whose organization has gone out of its way to make this videotape available in your area.
Hello, my name is John Kelly. I'm president of First Tennessee Bank. We're bringing you this videotape for a very important reason. As proud Americans, we want to do what we can to help our great democracy and our fellow citizens. We have the world's greatest democracy, but did you know that fewer than half our people vote in elections? That's the lowest rate in the world. Many people don't vote because they think they don't know enough about our government. We must do something about this problem. We must help our fellow citizens understand that our government is set up so that the people themselves are the government. The people who best understand our government realize that this is not just a meaningless theory, that all of us actually own our government. It may take a great deal of time and effort for us to get more of our 265 million co-owners to understand this, but it's important that they do because that's how our government works best. This videotape will help us understand how we as co-owners can most effectively play our role in our democracy. I hope you enjoy it.
Every once in a while throughout this videotape, just for the fun and education of it, we will take a time out and tell you little known but interesting fact about various American presidents, about the presidency, and about the executive branch of your country's government. Facts like the shortest and tallest presidents were James Madison at 5 foot 4 inches and Abraham Lincoln at 6'4". American voters used to beat only the small African nation of Botswana in terms of voter turnout on Election Day, participating in our democracy. Now even Botswana beats America in voter turnout. You can help this problem with our democracy if you share with your friends and family what you will know by the end of this video. It's the least you can do. You and all of us Americans are indebted to nearly 400,000, mostly young Americans, who are today lying in graves instead of living among us. They died in wars fought to ensure that, among other things, you, their fellow Americans, would be able to vote. To help you picture how many of these people died for our democracy, visualize the fact that if you were to drive past them standing in a line along a highway, you would have to drive for 2.5 hours at 60 miles an hour. Voting and encouraging voting is the least you can do. If I say the American government, what or who do many Americans picture? If you guessed the White House or the President of the United States, you were correct. The President runs our government, much like many executives run large organizations, and we call the President the executive of our government. We call the President of the United States the Chief Executive. Those who remember this title, Chief Executive, have little problem remembering which of the 3 branches of our national government the President heads, the executive branch. Time out for an interesting fact. Guess the age of the youngest wife of an American president, our youngest First Lady. 49-year-old President Grover Cleveland married in the White House a 21-year-old in 1886. Some of us don't vote because we don't believe that the president or his executive branch does much that affects our personal lives, the things we do from the time we wake up in the morning until we go to bed at night. They are wrong. What follows are some examples of how the executive branch can affect you, your family, and your friends. When President Bush, with the support of the Congress, decided to do something about the nation of Iraq invading the country of Kuwait, the families of 600,000 Americans in the military were dramatically disrupted. That's enough people to fill 9 huge professional football stadiums. When President Lyndon Johnson, with the reluctant support of the Congress, decided to escalate the Vietnam War, every family in America knew many people whose lives were disrupted in a major way. And 47,000, mostly young Americans, never again came home to their friends and family. So, national security, war and peace, is one major area where the executive branch has a dramatic impact on our lives. Even in non-war situations, presidents affect our daily lives in hundreds of ways, like whether we travel on a narrow road or a dual highway, if a life-saving medical procedure is discovered, or if someone you know goes to jail for violating federal drug laws. Another way to understand how important the president's executive branch of government is to each American involves money. If a person spends $208 a month on new car payments and has an annual income of $25,000 a year, he or she is spending on new car payments 10% of all the money he or she makes. Stated another way, 10% of their work year, January and nearly half of February, goes only to paying for a new car. What does this have to do with the importance of government? Well, the average American pays in taxes to the government 23% of all the money he or she makes in a year. This means that 23% of their work year, January, February, and nearly all of March, goes only to making money to pay federal taxes. You can think of your government as a group of people who you and your fellow citizens have selected to decide how to spend your tax money. In return for the taxes you must by law pay, all Americans get the world's most powerful military to protect them, beautiful national parks, payments for their medical care when they are old, and many other things. The federal taxes we pay also operate our country's legislative branch, the Congress, and the judicial branch, our federal courts. Time out for another interesting fact. Did you know that the government building which holds important documents like the U.S. Constitution, called the Archives Building, has the world's largest bronze doors? They weigh as much as 8 automobiles. Now that you know some examples of how the executive branch can affect your life, let's look at how the executive branch actually works. How can the president, one person, run all the functions of the executive branch? Actually, much of the day-to-day work of the president's executive branch is handled by the 14 people the president appoints or hires to serve as his main advisors and the managers of the government, his cabinet secretaries. One cabinet secretary is selected to head up each of the various departments of government. These cabinet secretaries, in turn, have under them deputy secretaries, undersecretaries, assistant secretaries, and other. A total staff of 2 million people. Nearly any issue which anyone can think of falls under the responsibility of one of the departments of one of the president's cabinet secretaries. The departments' names tell what they cover in some cases. For example, there are the departments of Agriculture, Defense, Education, Energy, Transportation, and Veterans Affairs. The names of 2 departments give you a general idea about what they cover: the Department of Housing and Urban Development and the Department of Health and Human Services. And the titles of the remaining 6 give you a more general idea of the subjects for which they have responsibility, like the Departments of Interior, Justice, Treasury, State, Labor, and Commerce. But don't worry if you have a problem finding a subject area in your federal government. In a few minutes, this videotape will let you in on a little-known but effective shortcut to such information. In the early 1900s, it was the job of the Treasury Department to wash, dry, and iron dirty money. The vast majority of the matters of your federal government which impact directly on your daily lives are handled by the President's cabinet secretaries in their departments. Their staff, for example, issues a passport to you for travel to another country, operates the Weather Bureau, assures that airplane travel and medicines are safe, that companies don't abuse their employees, promote adequate shelter and education for all, that there is adequate energy to run our nation, and that those who protect our country in the military are cared for when ill. These departments and the President's White House staff, which we will talk about later, make up the essence of what most people think of when they think of our national government's executive branch. In addition to cabinet departments and White House staff, the other segment of the executive branch is called independent agencies. They handle matters which usually don't directly impact on the average person, but usually involve major industries or very specific subjects. Some you have probably heard of, and some not. The reason they are called independent agencies is because although the President appoints the heads of these agencies, they are more independent of the President's control than are his departments. And, among other things, he doesn't meet as frequently with them as he does his cabinet. You now know more about the structure of the President's executive branch of our federal government than most of the American people. You know, for example, that the President has 14 cabinet secretaries. Each heads a department, which together make up the essence of what we consider to be our federal government, made up of 2 million federal employees. You know that there are independent agencies on which we have touched. The only major part of the executive branch we haven't covered, the White House staff, will be covered in an upcoming example of executive branch decision-making. Time out for an interesting fact. The cabinet member heading the military works in a building called the Pentagon, located just outside of Washington, D.C. Did you know that in that building there are over 17 miles of hallways, 4,200 clocks, and 683 water fountains? Now we will cover a little-known method that can help you deal with a very large and complicated federal government. The method utilizes another branch of your national government, the Congress of the United States. It goes through the individuals who the people in your area and in your state chose to help them with their federal government activities. They're a member of Congress, and they're 2 United States senators. They can also be a very effective access point to your executive branch. Among other things, they have an overview of all the departments of our government. To explain to you something about this process is a person who is elected to represent you and approximately 570,000 people in your area in the United States House of Representatives in Washington, D.C.
Hello, I'm Harold Ford Jr., Tennessee's 9th Congressional District Representative in the House of Representatives in Washington. I, along with 8 other members of the Tennessee Congressional Delegation, represent the state of Tennessee in Washington. Tennessee, like every other state, has 2 United States Senators, Fred Thompson and Bill Frist. We represent all of the state's interests as it relates to the federal government in Washington. Our legislative branch, which is one of our 3 branches, including the judicial and the executive, plays an important function in how our government works and how it interacts with the American people, namely those in Memphis. The 9th District in Tennessee, where I represent, comprises over 90% of Memphis. It's a diverse district, a district that also encompasses 1 or 2 of the suburbs in this area. It's a district that for 22 years before I served was represented by my dad. The legislative, executive, and judicial branches interact in interesting ways. The legislative branch's primary responsibility is to pass and to make laws. We make all the federal laws in America, those that relate to our workplace, those that relate to our schools, those that relate to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. We at the federal level and the legislative branch play an incredibly important role in helping to ensure that our government runs smoothly. The executive branch, which is namely our chief executive officer, the President of the United States, today it's Bill Clinton. His role is to enforce the laws, to sign the laws, and to ensure that what we've done in Congress meets his approval and meets the approval of the American people. It's my hope one day we can say that it meets her approval, but today we say it meets his approval. The judicial branch, which is made up of our district courts, our appellate courts, and Supreme Court, they interpret the laws and ensure that what we pass into Congress and what the President signs is indeed constitutional and indeed meets the constitutional test. When we pass laws in the Congress that deal with education, that deal with tobacco, that deal with Social Security, or any of the multitude of issues we deal with, it then moves on to the White House, to the executive branch, where the President and his advisors evaluate and assess whether or not this is good for America and this is what Americans want. If he deems that it's important, if he deems it something that he believes the American people want, he will sign it and it becomes law. If the President disagrees with what we pass, he has the option to veto. And if he vetoes it, it comes back to the Congress. The Congress is made up of two parts, the House, which I serve, where there are 435 members, and the Senate, where Bill Frist and Fred Thompson serve, where there are 100 members. If we vote a 2/3 or more vote to override the President's veto, meaning more than 2/3 of those in the House of Representatives and more than 2/3 of those in the United States Senate disagree with the President, then regardless of what the President does, it becomes law. But let's say it's a law that those of you at schools and those of you at churches and other places of worship disagree with. You have the option to challenge that law in our court system through the judicial branch. And if we learn that the laws that we pass, the laws that we overrode the President on, are unconstitutional, then the law is struck down because it does not meet that constitutional test. Our branches of government, the three branches, the judicial, the executive, and the legislative, we have three words to really describe the system of government that we have here in America. It's called checks and balances. So regardless of how kooky some of the decisions are we make in the Congress or the legislative branch, regardless of how kooky some of the decisions they make in the judicial branch or even the executive branch, because we have three branches with equal power and equal parts that can check and balance the other out, we don't have to worry as much as some other nations do around the globe about kooky laws and strange laws and bizarre laws passing. I've had the blessing to travel the world over the last 2 to 3 months, to Africa with the President, to Ireland recently with a colleague of mine. And you get a healthy sense of appreciation for our system of government, how it operates, how it functions, and why it's important that our three branches of government operate like they do. But in order for these three branches of government to operate, it's critical, incredibly important that each and every one of us play our part and play our role. The way we participate in this system is through voting, among other ways, but perhaps the most important way. When we vote at the local level for the city council or the mayor, the state level for state representatives or even the governor, or at the federal level for our representatives in the Congress or senators or even our president, we are participating in making our views and perspectives known and imposing our views on this system. A system that belongs to us, of the people, by the people, and for the people. In order for it to work, we must play our role and must do our part. As a young person, I have a great interest in ensuring that the widest number of young people participate in this system of government. We're blessed to have it. We're blessed to have those in the Congress today focusing on those issues that concern us the most and most importantly will impact us the most in the next 10 to 20 to 30 years. So it is my hope that those of you who watch this video, those of you who listen to your teachers, your civics and history and government teachers, those who listen to your parents, and others in your life whom you pay attention to and who have influence that talk about the importance of voting, that you will heed their advice. For it is so critical that if we are to maintain the strength that we have in this great world, that our generation assume our positions of responsibility, and one way we can do it is by understanding how our government works and participating in it through voting. Thank you, and God bless you.
Each executive branch department has a special office just to handle congressional matters. These offices are used to working with congressional staffs. Together, they are able to solve a lot of problems for Americans. We've discussed how the executive branch is divided into cabinet departments, headed up by cabinet secretaries. We've discussed the various subject areas these departments handle and how they can affect your life. There's another part of the work of the departments of the executive branch which we have not yet discussed. It involves helping the president carry out what may be his most visible function. That function is trying to change policies to improve our country. The departments frequently recommend to the president suggested improvements for subjects under their jurisdiction. These suggestions are usually very long and complex. They are hard to understand and evaluate. That is where the President's White House staff comes into play. They work with the departments to break these proposals down and present them to the President in a much shorter and simpler form. Some presidents lean very heavily on the judgment of their advisors and have this complex information presented in a way which would enable nearly any American with good judgment to make a good decision. Time out for a point of interest. Did you know that 3 of our early presidents, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and James Monroe, actually died on our country's birthday, the 4th of July? Jefferson and Adams died at nearly the exact same time. Back to the issue of executive branch decision-making and how a new policy or program is established. If the President decides to move forward with a department's suggestion for a new policy, it is the White House staff working with the departments which coordinates the efforts which attempt to bring about the change. We will look at a specific example. Let's say that a person in the President's government, an Assistant Secretary of Defense, is lobbied by experts in the field and by people who work for her or him for the adoption of compulsory national service. Such a service would require all Americans, upon graduation from high school or reaching the age of 18, for those not in high school, to serve their country for a year. Such national service could include things such as military service, working as a teacher's aide, or in our national parks. This is what is done in the countries of Israel for males and females, and in Germany and Nigeria for males. For this policy to be adopted, the Assistant Secretary would have to be able to convince his or her boss, the Secretary of Defense, to propose the idea to his or her boss, the President of the United States. Once the Secretary of Defense presents it to the White House, many parts of the White House staff become involved in helping the President consider such a proposal. One of the many White House staff inputs comes from the President's Chief of Political Affairs. Part of his or her job is to let the President know if the co-owners of America, the voters, want such a change. We single out this one White House staff office because it is so frequently misunderstood. You will sometimes hear people speak critically of elected officials like the President for being so focused on the next election or on voters' opinions. It's important to understand that focusing on voters' opinions of policies is the same thing as focusing on the desires or the will of the co-owners of this country. Let's get back to our example of universal public service after high school. Let's say that the President decides to go forward with this idea. Since the laws of America, which have been written by the Congress, do not allow the President on his own to create such a program, he or she would have to try to change the law. The staff members of the White House and the Department of Defense would have to lobby the senators and members of Congress and their staffs in an attempt to get the support of a majority of them. If the President considers this to be one of the administration's most important issues, the President may choose to personally lobby the issue by trying to persuade senators and members of Congress. Time out for an interesting fact. The term to lobby is extremely important to America's democracy. It means trying to convince a public official about a public policy issue. You won't believe how the term began. It started when President Ulysses Grant would regularly go for dinner to a hotel near the White House, the Willard Hotel, which is still there. People wanting him to change something in government began waiting to talk to him in the hotel lobby. Just as people involved in art are called artists and people who play the piano are called pianists, Grant kiddingly called these people in the lobby lobbyists. The term stuck. To effectively play our role as co-owners of this democracy, we should each be good lobbyists on those subjects on which we have some knowledge and experience. As your elected officials will tell you, it helps them make better laws and public policy if their voters help them understand which things in this country seem to be working and what things don't. You would be surprised how frequently the evidence which tips the balance of an elected official's decision about a major government program comes from the opinion of an average citizen. Now that you've learned about lobbying and that we should all be lobbyists, Let's get back to our example of compulsory national service. On a major issue like this, the White House would help the president carry to the country his message about the value of this program. Citizens would then be able to help their representatives in the House and Senate better understand the program. If the executive branch cannot get a majority of both the House and the Senate to pass a law allowing compulsory national service, the idea dies. On the other hand, except in very unusual circumstances, if a majority of the House and Senate is secured, the law gets passed, and the President has authorization to proceed with the new program. The department in charge of implementing the new program, in this case the Department of Defense, begins a rulemaking procedure. This rulemaking procedure, in essence, allows the affected parties to present their suggestions as to how this program can most effectively be implemented. Since you co-owners of this country are affected by government policies, you should feel free to get involved in this rulemaking part of your democracy as well. Once all of the citizens and other experts have explained their positions in person and on paper, the executive branch proceeds. This completes the President's public policy process. Do you remember earlier in this videotape when we discussed how the White House staff breaks down complicated issues for a presidential decision? Let me point out the parallel between the White House process and our choice as voters on Election Day. Like the President's complicated policy choices, the many positions of the many candidates from which we can choose on Election Day can seem very complicated. Surveys show that many Americans don't vote for this reason, but they should, because our system makes their Election Day choice quite simple. For example, one can vote for every candidate from a political party which most closely matches the way they think. Or they might ask themselves this question in a presidential election: do things in government seem to be going well enough that I should vote to keep this president in office? Or are things in government bad enough that I think someone else might do a better job? Average people are as good as the best when it comes to assessing their government. You don't have to be a great chef to know if the food tastes good. This simplistic democratic process has worked better than all the thousands of other seemingly brilliant government systems ever tried over thousands of years in all the countries around the world. As a former British Prime Minister, Winston Churchill once said, "Democracy is the worst form of government except all other forms that have been tried." Now let's hear about the executive branch of government from a former Republican Secretary of Transportation, Sam Skinner.
Hello, I'm Sam Skinner, formerly United States Secretary of Transportation. The executive branch of the federal government can sometimes seem a less than interesting place to work. In fact, this is not the case. From my many years of working in the private sector as an attorney and as a businessman, I can say that government service in the executive branch is very challenging and very worthwhile. The work of the executive branch is very serious work because the well-being of many Americans frequently depends on your doing your work correctly. For example, as Secretary of Transportation, I was responsible for making sure that our air traffic controllers operate at 100% all the time, thus ensuring air safety. When the project you are working on benefits thousands of your fellow Americans, you get a feeling of satisfaction that is hard to duplicate in the private sector. I would encourage you to consider public service as a career. I'm sure you would find it quite rewarding. Thank you.
Now let's hear from a Democratic cabinet member, Richard Riley.
I'm so pleased to have the opportunity to speak with you as you learn and study about the important work being done in the executive branch of our government. The executive branch, led by our president, has the responsibility of executing or carrying out the laws of our land. As you know, I have the privilege of working for President Clinton as his Secretary of Education. The U.S. Department of Education, which the President selected me to head, has the responsibility to promote educational opportunity and excellence throughout the nation. Now, in order to help improve teaching and learning and meet the educational needs of all citizens, I spend a great deal of time talking with and listening to students and parents, teachers, and others in communities all across the nation. One of the most important aspects of your education is learning about and following through on your role as citizens in our great nation. Because we live in a vibrant democracy, every citizen has the opportunity, the right, and the duty to participate in decisions that affect almost every part of our lives, locally and nationally. And it is this system, run by citizens, that has for more than 200 years attracted people from all around the world to our shores. So I encourage all of you to take part in activities that you may not have given a second thought to, but which many throughout the world are regularly denied: voting, running for office, serving on juries, and even reading the newspaper or watching television to get different views about your society. I once saw a poster that said a lot. It said it in just a few words. Vote, it said. Nelson Mandela struggled his whole life for this right, and you were born with it. Finally, I challenge each of you, using your own talents, to get involved in civic affairs in your own community. And that will make a difference both in your own life and for the future of our great nation.
We hope you now better understand the executive branch of your federal government. And we hope you'll become more involved in our country's government, which is the world's greatest democracy. Let me leave you with two quotes about the world's most successful government system, democracy. All the ills of democracy can be cured by more democracy. And democracy is based upon the conviction that there are extraordinary possibilities in ordinary people. Thank you.